Those days. I remember those days.
Hello, Vinyl community, and welcome to another musical adventure. Today's adventure is a follow-up on a video that was posted by Dylan over at Noble Records. You guys all know his channel. You've seen his content, which is always top-notch and great. Well, he did an album link challenge, and what he wants us to do is to link 20 albums together. Now, he didn't put any hard and fast rules on it, so I'm not going to follow any hard and fast rules. It's just to link these albums together in the best way that you can. I went directly by album. That's the only kind of rule that I followed. Where to start and where to end, I kind of had a couple of ideas. I was going to kind of pick up where Dylan left off and was just going to add to it and just keep the chain going, which probably would have made sense. But as you find, this is a great way to sort of dig through your collections. It's a great way to sort of figure out, you know, who did what. And like I said, there are no rules, and I'm not gonna put any rules down because there's no need in all that. So just have fun with it. And so you guys do a video, and make sure if you do, put your link to your video down below. Go over to Dylan's channel. I know you all are probably already subscribed to Dylan, but if you do it over there, put your link on his. I'm sure he wouldn't mind that. Just let him know that you followed up 20 albums, the link. And as I go through these, you'll see it. One of the things that I wanted to do was just connect like some of my favorite artists. Now, we could be really broad with this stuff, so that because there's so many musicians and people that played. Like I said, let me get into it, and we'll kind of follow through. I started, funny enough, and I was just trying to figure out a good place to start, and I just started connecting the dots. I started with Pleased to Meet Me by The Replacements. Now, I thought for a moment that I could just do something like the song Alex Chilton, which is, you know, Alex Chilton from Big Star, the Box Tops. I could have started with the Box Tops, went to Big Star, but I didn't want to go with songs or references. I wanted to go with actual personnel. And that's kind of what my thread is going to be. So, starting with The Replacements, we are going to go with Pleased to Meet Me, which was produced by Jim Dickinson. Jim Dickinson, Memphis legend. This is his album, Dixie Fried. This is an old promo copy, an original that I've got on Atlantic. Wonderful, wonderful album, Dixie Fried by Jim Dickinson. Of course, James Luther Dickinson has worked with just about anybody and everybody, including Big Star. That's one of the reasons The Replacements wanted to work with him. But Jim Dickinson has been around. This album was produced by Tom Dowd. That's a name that's going to show up because, I mean, Tom Dowd worked with so many people. But, yeah, this is Dixie Fried by James Luther Dickinson, or Jim Dickinson. Jim Dickinson played piano on this album, Time Out of Mind by Bob Dylan. This was Bob Dylan's 1997 sort of comeback album. It put Bob back on the map, musically relevant, and it's a historic album. The box set that was released earlier this year, Fragments, focuses on Time Out of Mind. So it was a big album. Won Grammy for Album of the Year. This album, Bob Dylan, featured Jim Dickinson, and it was produced by Daniel Lanois. And that's where my connection was on this. And you're probably screaming at the screen right now saying, well, you could do this, you could do that. Absolutely I could, but this is the way I did it. And there's no rules. Daniel Lanois, who worked on So by Peter Gabriel, the 1987 album. I believe it came out 86 actually. So featuring a lot of Peter Gabriel's biggest solo hits, Sledgehammer, Big Time, In Your Eyes. Really awesome album. But this album was produced by Daniel Lanois, and So by Peter Gabriel. Peter Gabriel, of course, was in the band Genesis. Genesis, this is the album The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which is probably my favorite of the Genesis albums, particularly the ones featuring Peter Gabriel. Of course, Peter Gabriel in Genesis. Genesis also featured Phil Collins. So we're trucking right along. This is Phil Collins' album, No Jacket Required, which was a big hit album featuring Sussudio and Don't Lose My Number. Take Me Home is also on No Jacket Required. No Jacket Required was produced by Phil Collins and Hugh Padgham. Hugh Padgham worked with so many artists in the 80s. Where do we go from here? I connected Hugh Padgham to his work with Paul McCartney and the album Press to Play, the 1987 album. Widely disregarded by a lot of Paul McCartney fans. But Press to Play, I like Press to Play, and I think I've voiced my thoughts on that on this channel before. But this album was not a huge commercial hit. Now, where do you go from there? Hugh Padgham, Press to Play, Paul McCartney. You could go almost anywhere from Paul McCartney, probably. But again, keeping with the personnel, Pete Townsend played guitar on some of the tracks on this album on Angry. And so I went with Pete Townsend and connected Paul to Pete Townsend. And I grabbed Rough Mix, the album that Pete Townsend did with Ronnie Lane. Oh boy, you guys are picking up this now. Ronnie Lane, who was in the Faces, the Small Faces. Ronnie Lane played with just about everybody. There's Ronnie right there. Of course, Pete. But the album Rough Mix, I did not go with Ronnie Lane. One of the musicians that played on this album, on a couple of the tracks, was this little-known guitar player named Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton. Oh my gosh, where do you go from Eric Clapton? Now, some of these are some of the ones that showed up on Dylan's list, and probably understandably so. But Eric Clapton, I went with Derek and the Dominoes, Layla, and Other Assorted Love Songs, produced by Tom Dowd, and just about everyone played on this album. It's a classic record. You all know it. You love it. Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs by Eric Clapton, Derek and the Dominoes. So you can almost go anywhere from this album. I went with Bobby Whitlock. Bobby Whitlock, who played on Derek and the Dominoes, on Layla. And a lot of the same personnel was on this self-titled release from Bobby Whitlock on the ABC Dunhill label. And so one of the personnel, someone that played bass guitar on this album by Bobby Whitlock, was Klaus Voormann. We're back in Beatle territory again. Of course, Klaus Voormann also played on Pussycats by Harry Nilsson. Harry Nilsson and John Lennon. That's right, John Lennon produced this album, Pussycats by Harry Nilsson. Now, Harry Nilsson, I mean, what can you say? There's so many places you can go from this album. We got Klaus Voormann on this album, but also on this album is a gentleman named Sneaky Pete. Sneaky Pete, that's where I'm jumping off. I'm trying to be varied with my list. I'm trying to jump around and go from different genres, you know, starting with the Replacements. We're into Harry Nilsson now. Harry Nilsson you can connect to just about anybody. But I went with the Flying Burrito Brothers. There's Sneaky Pete there. This, of course, is The Gilded Palace of Sin, the classic album by the Flying Burrito Brothers. Of course, the Flying Burrito Brothers, Graham Parsons, he's going to show up in a little bit. I mean, you know, all these guys were connected. Chris Hillman, that's where I'm connecting it, is through Sneaky Pete to Chris Hillman. Chris Hillman, of course, played with a lot of folks. Here's another one that showed up on Dylan's list, showing up on mine, Stephen Stills, Manassas. Of course, Chris Hillman was in Manassas with Stephen Stills. But one of the other players on this album, again, another album featuring a lot of players, a lot of different musicians. Of course, you see the names on the front there. But the one that I picked was Al Perkins. Yeah, I went with Al Perkins because I thought, you know, that was kind of my, I won't say jumping off point, but, you know, connecting the dots. Going with Al Perkins, who played pedal steel. Al Perkins, and again, I'm trying to showcase some of my favorite artists, people you've heard me talk about before on this channel. If you haven't seen my channel before, a lot of these people I talk about, go back and look at some of my videos. But Al Perkins is connected to Michael Nesmith, one of my all-time favorite musicians and writers and artists, Michael Nesmith. This is his album from the late 70s, Live at the Palais. It is a live album recorded in Australia and featuring some really cool arrangements of some of his songs. Al Perkins, of course, is the pedal steel player on this album. Also on this album is John Ware, who played drums with Michael Nesmith's First National Band. But I'm connecting album to album, personnel by personnel, Al Perkins to John Ware. So John Ware, the drummer, who's played with a lot of folks, but most significantly probably, he played in Emmylou Harris's Hot Band. John Ware played with a lot of folks. Now, Emmylou Harris, I mean, good night. Where do you go with Emmylou Harris? I mean, she's played with everyone. This is Emmylou Harris's album, Elite Hotel. And like I said, everybody has probably worked with Emmylou Harris. So you can go a million places from here. I thought about the Trio album with Dolly Parton and Linda Ronstadt. You could go from there. There's so many dots you could connect with Emmylou Harris. But I connected Emmylou Harris to one of my favorite artists, Elvis Costello. And she sings on this album, Elvis Costello and the Imposters, The Delivery Man, recorded in Mississippi at Sweet Tea Studios in Oxford, Mississippi. This was an album, I think came out in 2004. I'm thinking 2004. The Delivery Man, featuring the vocals of Emmylou Harris and, of course, Elvis Costello. Now, where do you go with Elvis Costello? You can go a lot of places, but there's a pedal steel player. What's the deal with the pedal steel players on my list? Pedal steel player McPhee, John McPhee. And so John McPhee has played with so many people. John McPhee, Huey Lewis and the News. There's so many folks, John McPhee. But again, connecting personnel to personnel. John McPhee also played on Tupelo Honey by Van Morrison. Where are my Van Morrison fans at? This is a classic album. You can probably barely see the track listing. Of course, Wild Night is on this album. Also, of course, the title track, Tupelo Honey, which is a classic. So, where do you go from Van Morrison? This album was produced by Ted Templeman, who was a Warner Brothers producer. Ted Templeman also produced 1984 by Van Halen. I love that we just went from Van Morrison to Van Halen. 1984, featuring the singles Panama, Jump, Hot for Teacher, which was a big song. This was an album that catapulted Van Halen into sort of superstardom. And of course, Van Halen featuring the guitar virtuoso, great Eddie Van Halen, widely regarded as one of the greatest guitarists of all time. Eddie Van Halen played on Beat It by Michael Jackson, Thriller, the biggest selling album of all time. Of course, you can connect this to so many people. Quincy Jones produced this album. Paul McCartney's on this album. There's so many people that you can connect to Michael Jackson through the years. But going with personnel, going with the album Thriller. Thriller features a keyboardist named Greg Phillinganes. Now, Greg Phillinganes has played with just about anybody who's anybody just throughout LA. If you've recorded there, you've probably recorded with Greg. He's played on just about any genre. I connected Greg to The Night Fly by Donald Fagen. Greg is all over this album, playing keyboards. Of course, Donald Fagen, Steely Dan. I mean, there's a lot of places you can go from Donald Fagen. But that is 20 albums, starting with The Replacements, ending with Donald Fagen. So many things to connect in between. So many places you can jump out of from there. And so now the challenge is for you to connect 20 albums. Cover art, you maybe could say, cover art. There were so many places and people, and every time I would pull an album and go, okay, here's a great one, and then I would go, okay, well, this connects to this, it connects to that. I could go, there's so many places you could go. I just want to say, of all those records, I did not pull out a single Byrds album. Whoa! So that's pretty great because the Byrds are kind of connected to everybody. Also, I just want to say, in my defense, no Monkees album ended up in there, but I did get Michael Nesmith in, which I thought was kind of fun. You could have used, there's so many names that come up. People like Van Dyke Parks. There's just, John Lennon, Paul McCartney. We got John Lennon and Paul McCartney in a list without using the Beatles, which I thought was kind of fun. But we could have connected Klaus Vormann. There's so many things. Hey, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, you know what to do. Please do so. Try to do some regular content here at least once a week. And so jump into this thread. I think it's really fun. It's fun to dig through the collection and start pulling stuff and connecting the dots, connecting 20 albums. Thanks to Dylan for coming up with this idea. I think it's really awesome. And so you guys start having some fun and you do your own response and your own list and have tons of fun with it because I sure did. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.